Recording has started. Take it away.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Achal Raj. I'm with the US EPA headquarters, and I work primarily on domestic preference, so your American Iron and Steel and the Build America, Buy America Act. And I will let my colleague Kristen introduce herself too.
Hey everyone, my name is Kristen Radachak, and I work with Achal doing domestic preference and the Clean Water SRF.
And just for the purpose of this presentation, because of the recording, I will also turn my camera off until after. Okay, so today's presentation cannot substitute for official guidance, nor can today's presentation change or contradict existing guidance or the statute. So just putting that out there. And really the purpose of today's webinar is for the EPA to present a simplified review of BABA. And we hope to provide you with a better understanding of these requirements. And so, of course, with the caveat that we are human and any potential misstatements or errors we make during this presentation cannot substitute for the official BABA statute or guidance. So kind of just giving you a brief background of the domestic preference. This graphic here, which is obviously not to scale, tells the story of EPA's water infrastructure domestic preference requirements and the important dates that are within that timeline. So EPA's water infrastructure programs have been successfully managing domestic preference requirements for almost 15 years now, with a small gap between the Recovery Act and American Iron and Steel for the state revolving funds. So hopefully no one is finding out about BABA for the first time today, but in case you are, hold tight, and we hope to get you up to speed quickly. So just a bit of background on Bill and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, also commonly known as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. This was signed on November 15th of 2021, and it became effective May 14th of 2022, which is, I'm hoping you're aware that that is the effective date of the Build America, Buy America Act. And so this is very significant as it applies to more than 70 EPA infrastructure financial assistance programs, of which roughly 17 of those are EPA water infrastructural federal financial assistance programs. So the scope of BABA and the implications are very broad and very vast. So with BABA, there are three important points in this short paragraph on your screen. Really, the first is that we are introduced to three categories of products. So we begin with iron and steel, your manufactured products, and then your non-ferrous construction materials. Secondly, BABA applies to all federal funding, so that's not just bill funding unless covered by a waiver, of course. It applies to more than 70 EPA infrastructure financial assistance programs, as I had mentioned earlier. And third of all, for the purposes of BABA, a project means any activity that is related to the construction, alteration, or maintenance of infrastructure in the United States, and infrastructure means permanent, affixed, aka incorporated, and that serves the public's interest. So we'll come back to that later. Kind of diving into the items that are covered with BABA. So it covers, as I had mentioned, iron and steel products, your manufactured products, and non-ferrous construction materials. So these are items. So items for BABA can only be classified into one of the three categories. Really, for the ease of administration, items should not be considered to fall into multiple categories. And very importantly, this applies to one single product and not a category of products. So basically, this means that in the same project, you can have valves that fall into the iron and steel category, and other valves are considered manufactured products, if not containing, of course, primarily iron and steel by materials cost. Also, it covers items that are consumed in or incorporated into or affixed to an infrastructure project. In other words, permanently incorporated. This does not apply to items that are removed from the construction site prior to the completion of the project, like the trench box that's in the picture on the slide. And it also doesn't apply to small equipment and furnishings that are used at or within the finished project. So things like movable chairs, desks, or portable computer equipments do not need to comply with BABA. Now, moving on to the first category, your iron and steel category. So essentially items that are primarily made of iron and steel, unless another standard applies or a different law or regulation. And this includes manufacturing processes, so beginning from the initial melting stage through the application of coatings, all of those need to occur domestically within the United States. The good news is that EPA has been purchasing and using domestic iron and steel products extensively for a decade now almost through the SRF and WIFIA programs. And so we know that domestically there is an availability and BABA compliant iron and steel is widely available, provided sufficient lead time, of course, is allowed. So we do recommend that you plan ahead, and projects should always, should well be available to locate a vast majority of these BABA compliant products, and it should be available at comparable prices and often cheaper too. So the iron and steel products that you will encounter typically fit into the above, generalized categories of products. The Office of Water Implementation Procedures, which we will discuss in more depth later, it includes a handy list of all the iron and steel products that EPA water projects have encountered in the past decade or so in Section 2. But in general, anything that is a hunk and chunk of iron and steel with greater than 50% iron and steel by cost will be within this category. Just of note, precast concrete can sometimes be less than 50% iron and steel by component cost. However, due to a complex part of the BABA statute, which is called the savings provision, EPA's Office of Water must continue to implement precast reinforced concrete as an iron and steel product. It's not a huge concern. However, because BABA compliant iron and steel products of this type are generally domestically available, so shouldn't be an issue. Moving on to manufactured products. So this includes products where essentially the final manufacturing took place in the United States. So for these products, the cost of components that are mined, produced, or manufactured in the US is greater than 55% of the total cost of all components of the manufactured product. As the final bullet says on the slide, we have more to say in this on later slides about BABA manufactured products in light of recent and long-awaited guidance from the Office of Management and Budget. Provided here, we just have some pictures of manufactured products that you might see either on project sites or in various different infrastructure projects. So there is this dewatering screw press, some pump motors on a skid, and some other pictures as well. And moving on to our final and third category, which is your non-ferrous construction materials. And we like to think of these as items of uniform character, and so essentially not combined with other items. So for instance, a plate of glass is a construction material. However, if you combine that with a frame of vinyl, wood, or even metal, for example, it then becomes a manufactured product. So examples of such include items that are plastic products, lumber or drywall, and examples of excluded items, as you can see on the screen, are items made primarily of iron and steel manufactured products, because an item can only be in one category, of course, and then your cement and cementitious materials or asphalt. One thing to note here is that OMB's guidance, which is 2 CFR 184, includes a few new categories of products herein, so such as your engineering lumber, and it clarifies the scope of manufacturing processes for such items to comply. So, for instance, lumber is defined as having been debarked and processed. We addressed this in more detail in later slides, just discussing the recent 2 CFR 184 guidance. This slide here we included as a reference for you more than anything else, and it essentially highlights the slight variations for what produced in the United States means for each additional construction material that we had that I discussed earlier. So these definitions are from the 2 CFR 184 and the recent codified guidance from OMB that we will discuss later. All right, so moving on to how can projects comply? If a project must comply with BABA, the first step is to ascertain what products must comply. So projects can demonstrate this compliance through products with BABA through one of two methods. So you have your certification letters or a waiver. Before we jump into that, when working on a project that's subject to domestic reference requirements, everyone plays a role in this. So manufacturers, it begins with the manufacturer, and they start by certifying that their product complies and documenting that assertion. So that comes in the form of a certification letter. Contractors verify that their products are compliant prior to the installation, and then the projects collect and maintain the certification letters. The documenting compliance section of the guidance includes much more detail on the topics on this slide, so please reference that when you have time. In addition to outlining the documenting compliance requirements, it also outlines the key documentation requirements for manufacturers. So product compliance for the manufacturers is essentially, given through a certification letter. And what we recommend through these certification letters is 5 key elements. And so these 5 key elements for BABA certification letters is very similar to what our other statutory requirement American Iron and Steel has, plus an additional sub-element, if you will. So kind of just going right off the bat, manufacturers provide cert letters, and so they should always identify the project and list the products that are being supplied to that project. They need to identify the location or multiple locations of manufacturing that are being certified, and then include a signature of a company representative on company letterhead, ideally. And then finally, a statement attesting that the product complies with BABA. The statement, so the key difference here is the statement must also identify the category of the category that the product falls into. So meaning it's either going to be identified as an iron and steel item, a manufactured product, or a non-ferrous construction material. This is especially true for items that are not in the iron and steel category, and so reference to either the non-ferrous construction materials requirements or the manufactured products component cost tests, where applicable, is key when certifying compliance. So here we have the cert letter, the Holy Grail, which is kind of an example that we like to give. Just note that the key elements have all been identified. So, going through it, we have the project that's identified, the Hobbiton water treatment plant in the Shire. There's been a specific list of products that have been clearly detailed, the location of the manufacturing. So this includes the city and state. The domestic preference requirement is referenced. So in this instance, it would be the Build America, Buy America Act. And then it also breaks it down even further into the product category, which is essential. And then finally, there is a signature of a company representative. So these are kind of the 5 key elements that we look for, or that you should look for when certification letters are received. And this is, kind of the example that we like to go by. And with that, I will pass it off to Kristen.
Thank you. Okay, so now I'm going to start talking about BABA waivers. So I want to note right from the start that before using any waiver or considering one, projects should make every effort to procure domestic products. There are 2 categories of waivers that I'm going to talk about. So the first is general applicability waivers, and then there's also product or project-specific waivers. So for the purposes of today's presentation, I'm really going to be focusing on just 2 of the general applicability waivers because I think they will be the most useful to you. So the first is our de minimis waiver. We have a de minimis waiver for BABA. This waiver allows for a small number of products of unknown or non-domestic origin to be used in a project. So there's a caveat to this waiver. Products included on a BABA project's de minimis list are limited to 5% of the project's cost. Documentation for products added to the de minimis list must be maintained in a format of the recipient's choosing, so we do not dictate that format for you. But the example that's on this slide here is one way of documenting de minimis items for your project. So one thing of note, de minimis is based on construction and alteration project costs. So soft, if you will, non-construction costs are not considered in the project cost. But let's dive into this example that's on the screen here. So we have a project with the total project cost is $1 million. So 5% of the project cost is $50,000. So that is the 5% threshold that is included on this example de minimis list. As you see here, there are items that are described on the list, and the quantities and cost per unit are listed for each item, as well as the total cost when that's calculated out for the total quantity that's needed. On our example here, the total listed is $35,000, so they are under their $50,000 threshold for their de minimis list. So as long as this de minimis list and all the documentation to show to help support this list is maintained, you are good to use that waiver. Another one that I wanted to just kind of touch on is the small award waiver. This is based on the size of assistance agreement, and it may not really be immediately relevant to you all, but I do want to make you aware that it exists in case you have a project that can use this waiver in the future. So it's a $250,000 threshold for projects that have assistance agreements under that threshold. This waiver is available. There's also a minor components waiver. This is for use by iron and steel manufacturers. This waiver allows manufacturers to include non-domestic iron or steel components in their BABA compliant product. So this isn't one that you would use at the project level, but you may see certification letters where a manufacturer is citing that they're using this waiver. What it means is that minor components in a product are limited to up to 5% of the material cost of the product. So as an example, a valve manufacturer may incorporate non-domestic pins and springs into its product, up to 5% of the material cost of the valve, and then they would be covered under this waiver and thus still be able to certify that their valve is compliant with the iron and steel requirements of BABA. There is also a Pacific Islands Territories waiver listed on here. I don't think that will be applicable to you, but it is on here. There are additional general applicability waivers as well. I did not list them out on these slides, but I'll give you links later on if you are curious as to the other waivers that are available. As far as other waivers in general, the administration through the Made in America office, that office operates out of the Office of Management and Budget out of the White House, views new general applicability waivers based on public interest as having to meet a very high bar. For example, the Pacific Islands Territory waiver that was on the previous slide underwent serious scrutiny and high-level review even before its proposal. This is all to say, don't expect to see many additional public interest nationwide kind of general applicability waivers going forward. That being said, EPA fully intends and expects that product-specific broad waivers based on non-availability to receive a reasoned review through the MIAO, that's the Made in America office. We have another such waiver for EV chargers. That is an example of the kind of waiver I'm talking about. So at the end of 2023, EPA, along with partner agencies, issued a request for information in the Federal Register. And this was requesting information from manufacturers on products that are not currently manufactured domestically. The purpose of this RFI was to gain understanding of domestic availability of manufactured products commonly used in water infrastructure projects. And that was with the whole goal of seeing if time-limited product-specific waivers may be appropriate. Okay, so moving on from general applicability waivers, there are also project and product-specific waivers. The first type of project or product-specific waivers are non-availability waivers. These are going to be the most common type of project-specific waivers, and they are appropriate when a product is not available domestically in a reasonable amount of time or meeting the technical specifications of a project. We anticipate an increase of these waivers as BABA starts to apply to more projects. The next type of waiver is a public interest waiver, in which compliance with BABA is not in the public's best interest. There is a very high bar for these waivers, and we have it on good authority that the Made in America office is not open to considering even project-specific public interest waiver requests. That said, if you feel like you have a good case for a public interest waiver, please reach out to us and we'll work with you. The third type of waiver is an unreasonable cost waiver. These waivers are appropriate when the use of domestic products would increase the total project cost more than 25%. We expect cost waivers to increase with BABA as well. So I want to go through the process with you for requesting a non-availability waiver, since those are the most common that we see. So in order to request a waiver, you would first work with your project officer. We review that information once it's passed on to us for basic information, including project summary, due diligence that was performed in an attempt to locate a domestic product, pricing information that was received, and the technical specifications for the product. We also want to see a timeline for the project included in the waiver request. And if it appears after we review that information that a non-availability waiver is appropriate, we proceed with market research, during which our contractor reaches out to manufacturers and suppliers in an attempt to locate domestically manufactured products that could be available in a reasonable amount of time and meeting the technical specs of your project. If our contractor believes such a product has been located, then we put the applicant in touch with that manufacturer. EPA conducts very thorough market research for every waiver request that we process. Our research tends to identify a usable domestic product in roughly 1 in 4 cases, just of note. And if in that process, the project is able to procure a product that was manufactured domestically, then great, we would stop the process at that point. If not, we need documentation to that effect that maybe the manufacturer wasn't able to meet your technical specifications, and then we will move forward in our process, which is to submit the waiver request to the Made in America office for review. Once we get the green light from them, we post the request and the technical specifications for a 15-day public comment period. Again, if through that process we receive a comment that maybe indicates a domestically produced product is available, then we will put you in touch with that manufacturer. And if you're able to procure a domestic product, great, and we will stop the process there. If not, we draft a decision memo and route it through our internal review process. However, before we're able to get the waiver signed, we have to send it back to the Made in America office again for their final approval. For our other domestic preference requirements, we have similar processes, and a typical project-specific non-availability waiver for a straightforward project would take around 6 to 8 weeks from receipt of that waiver request to approval. We anticipate that the new MIAO process will add at least 15 days to that process, but early evidence implies it could be much higher for many waiver reviews. We advise at this time that project-specific BABA product non-availability waivers will take an estimated 12 weeks. It could go longer, depends on the scope of the waiver request. So the moral of the story is to get your waiver requests in very early. We also, if you reach out to us very early in the process, we can provide informal market research at no cost to help you locate a domestic product if one is available. Okay, so assistance recipients and their representatives can request waivers and can reach out to the project officer to do so. As a general policy, EPA will not process waiver requests from suppliers, distributors, or manufacturers. Approved general applicability and agency-wide waivers do not require a separate waiver request. So for assistance recipients using the de minimis waiver, for example, that's a self-executing waiver. So you can just go ahead and use it and have a de minimis list for your project. Additionally, the minor components waiver is used by iron and steel manufacturers, as I mentioned before, and it doesn't require a separate waiver request in order to be used. Okay, so kind of moving into resources. After the Office of Management and Budget published their initial guidance, which was known as M2211 in April of 2022, EPA held multiple webinars along with additional stakeholder outreach in order to gauge whether additional questions needed addressing for EPA programs. As a result, EPA initiated and published the Office of Water Implementation Procedures on November 3rd, 2022, which acts as guidance applicable to all of our Office of Water programs with BABA requirements. As mentioned, extensive stakeholder outreach and coordination occurred in the development of this implementation memo. We also coordinated review through all of EPA and our regions, noting that we have more than 70 programs with BABA requirements and at least 17 in the Office of Water alone, plus review by the Made in America Office of OMB. Folks have asked, why did it take until November to publish this guidance after the M2211 memo came out in April? But hopefully many folks understand that effective implementation cannot occur out of thin air, and getting the framework right for the significant and wide-reaching BABA requirements required EPA to coordinate with thousands of individuals and organizations in development of this guidance. So we're going to highlight just a few sections of this implementation guidance shortly, but we should first acknowledge that since November 2022, Office of Management and Budget has very recently released 2 very significant additional guidance updates, including the codified regulatory guidance that we referenced earlier at 2 CFR 184 and the updated memo, which is known as M2402. We will address those in later slides. Okay, so The Office of Water Implementation Guidance addresses issues relative to all 17 Office of Water programs with BABA requirements. The first 5 sections will apply to all 17 of these programs, but sections 6 and 7 only apply to specific programs. So those are just for our WIFIA and state revolving fund programs mostly. The appendices provide sample contract and assistance agreements language for recipients, which are very important documents that every project needs. Okay, the OMB's Made in America office updated the April 2022 BABA implementation guidance memo with the M2402 memo, and that was released on October 25th, 2023. OMB forecast this revised memo in the preamble of 2 CFR 184, which was first published in late August of last year, and stated that it would be happening as close to the effective date of 2 CFR 184 as possible. This memo states that the changes in M2402 are to rectify issues of conflict between 2 CFR 184 and the original M2211. In our reading, it departs significantly from this framework and justification of some key points in M2211. It introduced some significant new policies that agencies may need to address, possibly through revised guidance. So that is something to keep an eye out for, that we may be updating our guidance with additional Qs and As. Final guidance can be found at 2 CFR 184. Like I said, it was published on August 23rd, 2023, and became effective October 23rd, 2023. We've included a link to the final guidance on this slide and can't emphasize enough how important it is for all of you to read it for yourselves. This presentation does not substitute for codified regulation. If you've already read or glanced at the guidance, you know how lengthy it is. However, most of it is preamble. So when the draft guidance was published, OMB requested comments on 11 topics and received about 2,000 comments in response. So the first 100 pages of the final guidance includes OMB's response to those comments. The preamble is still important, but if you're short on time, you could skip ahead and read just the last 10 pages, starting on page 126. Emphasizing again, it's important for you to read the guidance for yourselves. I just did want to include this brief slide, just so folks are aware of some of the key pieces of information that we got out of 2 CFR 184. We don't expect recipients to be experts on this. You can always reach out with any questions that you have. But it's important to be aware of just kind of generally what information is provided in 2 CFR 184 that you wouldn't have found elsewhere prior to its release. So the codified guidance defines key terms that are shown on your screen, including manufactured product, component, manufacturer, and what it means for products to be produced in the US. It also provides guidance on how manufacturers should be determining whether manufactured products are produced in the US by discussing the determination of the cost of components in a manufactured product. We have a few resources on the screen here. Our website is at the top there. The agency's BABA webpage is housed through our Clean Water State Revolving Fund web domain, but it does apply to all the agency. So please use that as to look for any kind of reference material that might be helpful for you. Please reach out to us with any questions. You can reach us at baba-ow@epa.gov. We have a lot of folks that are in that box to answer folks' questions, and we strive to have a really fast response when questions come in. So please reach out to us. We definitely get a lot of questions in the box, and we really want to get the word out to folks on how to comply. And lastly, there's also the Office of Management and Budget Made in America office website that is provided for you as well. So that's all we have for you today. I hope that was helpful, but we're happy to take your questions. Thank you so much. We can stop the recording at this point.